Hey agents, Dispatch here, and today we're going to talk about DPS, damage per second. You might think, multiply the damage by the rate of fire, and that's the DPS. But it's not quite that simple, and we're going to find out why. Then we'll talk about the real way to calculate it, and apply that specifically to the Division 2. What is DPS? DPS is the average damage per second that your weapon will inflict upon the enemy. How DPS is typically calculated is by multiplying the damage times the rate of fire. Rate of fire is typically thought about like speed. If you're going 10 miles per hour, you travel continuously at a steady rate, and in 1 hour, you'll go 10 miles. In half an hour, you'll go 5 miles. But what if I told you that rate of fire was a lie? In this analogy, you expect both racers to start at the starting line 0, then move at a constant speed, and whichever is faster finishes first. However, weapons do not operate this way. They fire discrete damage values starting at 0 and periodically throughout firing. To use the analogy, our racers start at their initial damage value, not at 0, and then leap forward to the next damage value at a certain interval determined by the rate of fire. This means since rate of fire doesn't include the first bullet, it is actually off by 1 in every case because that first bullet happens instantaneously. The rate of fire should instead be inverted and referred to as the bullet cycle time or bullet cycle interval. This has been confirmed with frame-by-frame testing in the firing range. With the rate of fire, you can find out how long it takes before the next bullet is fired. So we can see here on the Division 2 builds tool, great resource by the way, you can build your whole build here. You got the damage over time visualization, but there's a bit of a lie here. At time 0, that first bullet hits, we're actually going to be not at 0, we're going to be up here. And so even this build tool, which provides this great looking graph over here, which is just amazing, doesn't show the correct damage. Therefore, our true DPS calculations should account for this first bullet. What's the easiest way to do this? Before we answer this, we should talk about the different types of DPS. So far, we've technically been talking about burst DPS, which is a simple average DPS while the weapon is firing uninterrupted. What we haven't accounted for is sustained DPS. Sustained DPS is a modification of burst DPS where we account for the magazine size and reload time. This is meant to simulate your average DPS if you're firing continuously at a target, reloading, and continuing to fire. Let's talk about how to actually calculate these. The easiest way is to start with the damage and multiply that by the number of the bullets in the mag. We can usually take the number of bullets in the mag at face value, assuming that we reload before firing and then never reload from empty. For example, if we have a standard AR with the 50 round mag, we reload before the engagement so we have 51 bullets in the mag. In order to make sure that we don't have to go through the long reload penalty from completely emptying the mag, we would fire 50 rounds, then reload, which would put 50 rounds back into the weapon. Then we repeat the process. Hope you're starting to see the possible shortcomings of DPS calculations in this explanation, but we'll get to that in just a little bit. Now that we have our total mag damage, we need to figure out how long it takes to fire that damage. We take the rate of fire, divide it by 1 minus the mag size, since the first bullet fires instantly, and this gives us the mag time. Now to find the burst DPS, we divide the mag damage by the mag time. To find the sustained DPS, we divide the mag damage by the mag time plus the reload time. All of these calculations, provided that they are conducted correctly by accounting for the first instantaneous bullet, provide us some information but have significant shortcomings in practice. Burst DPS doesn't account for reloads due to a target having more health. Sustained DPS assumes perfect reloads and continuous firing. In combat, we're constantly taking fire, acquiring new targets, repositioning, deploying skills, etc. Only with very large bosses that can be crowd controlled do we continuously fire with no breaks, and even then it's very hard with most weapons to perfectly reload before the last bullet. In another instance, when repositioning, it's advised to reload your weapon while you're moving so you have a full mag as soon as you get to your next location. In this case, you're resetting your sustained DPS back to a burst DPS scenario. For general use, I think burst DPS is the most useful. It tells me the average DPS that I have while I'm firing and exposed. We don't need to take any of those other caveats into consideration to compare two weapons or loadouts. While sustained DPS should be taken into consideration, it should take a backseat to burst DPS, even for just the reason that you're not going to be able to fire continuously in combat. DPS in the Division 2 is determined by a known formula. There's been a lot of inaccurate information about this formula from the community and from the descriptions in the game itself, which makes it seem more complex than it really is. This formula basically breaks down to our cycle time times the base damage, which you can see here, times the base damage times a long list of multipliers. These multipliers are the percentage bonuses on our build. First, we should establish that percentage bonuses are translated into multipliers by dividing by 100 and then adding 1. Dividing by 100 turns the percentage into a decimal, then adding 1 accounts for the fact that it's increasing our damage. Let me know in the comments if you need a further breakdown of this process. Let's talk about the types of bonuses that we have. Bonuses with the same name are added together before becoming a multiplier. For example, all weapon damage, see right here, weapon damage, they're all added together before becoming a multiplier. We've got 10% from our watch, 10% from Fenris, 15% from our specialization, 15% from our assault rifle, 15 from our weapon damage cores on our items. Total together make one big multiplier. These two add together, so we have 106% assault rifle damage bonus total. So that'll turning that into a multiplier, we divide by 100, which becomes 1.06, then add 1. So our damage is going to get multiplied by 2.06. So if we multiply our base weapon damage, as you can see, it's just over our base weapon damage because we're just over doubling it. Every other damage category follows this process, including damage to targets out of cover, critical hit damage, headshot damage, damage to armor, damage to health. As you see right here, Hollow Man has 10% health damage, and our assault rifle also has 21% health damage, so that gets added together into one lump sum. The only exception to this is amplified damage. Amplified damage sources do not add together. Instead, each one creates its own multiplier in the equation. So the more amplified damage sources you have on your build, the more multipliers are going to be created in your formula. It's kind of like the developer shorthand for saying, we don't want to name a category for this talent and 20 other talents in the game. So we'll just say it's amplified so that you know that it goes by itself in its own multiplier. Critical hit damage and headshot damage have special circumstances as well, which we'll discuss later. So the question you might be asking yourself, and you may already know the answer to, is why do we even care about this? Well, during this process, bonuses that are added together have diminishing returns, and this is referred to commonly as additive bonuses. You may have also heard of the term multiplicative, which refers to bonuses that are multipliers. Amplified talents are always by themselves, so they are always multiplicative. They always translate directly into their multiplier and are not added to anything else. Most of the other categories in the game, as you can see from our equation here, add together in a sum. So it is possible for a bonus to be additive and multiplicative at the same time. You can see that damage to targets out of cover, while commonly thought about as multiplicative, is also additive if you've got more than one source, such as on your weapon and Fox's Prayer knee pads. So you can see our average bullet damage over here is equal to our base weapon damage times our weapon damage multiplier times our crit and headshot multiplier, our total weapon damage multiplier, if present, our out of cover multiplier, damage to targets out of cover, if present, health damage multiplier, armor damage multiplier, any amplified damage multipliers get created on the end as well. All of these may or may not be on your build depending on if you have them on your build or not. So let's talk about each of those multipliers in that divide by 100 plus 1 translation that we do. So as you can see, there's a theme here where every single category has a sum in it except for amplified damage sources, where each of these bonuses is a sum of all the attributes that you have on your build in that category. Weapon damage comes from your specialization, as we've already discussed, from brand bonuses, from your watch, all that kind of stuff. Keep in mind that that is different than total weapon damage. It's very confusing in game because in the descriptions it'll have weapon damage in orange in the description, and it'll have total weapon, the total with the lowercase t right in front of it. So it doesn't seem like it's its own category, but it is. And you can see that if you test it. So things like obliterate, vigilance, all those talents become multiplicative and are not additive unless you have more than one on your build. So if you have obliterate and vigilance, they will be additive together. You won't get 1.25 times 1.25. You will get 1 plus 0.25 plus 0.25. So it'll be 1.5 or 50% bonus. How do we translate that into DPS? Well, over here we've got our burst DPS and sustained DPS. And these are averages, of course. If you get a headshot, your damage is going to go way up. If you crit, your crit damage is going to go way up. But this is on average, accounting for how often you do those things based on this right here. These percentages in the equation are the uptime of the various talents and categories. Basically, this is saying how often is this multiplier going to be active or this bonus going to be active. For example, if you're hitting 50% headshots, that is going to affect your average damage, and that needs to be accounted for in here. If you want it to be simpler and you don't want to worry about that, it's totally reasonable to just cut that out. For example, if you're not going for headshots, or you just want to make things simpler for yourself and find out what the maximum potential of your build is, you can just cut those out. But things like damage to targets out of cover, if you're getting bogged down, if you're running a lot of armor cores, and by the time you're able to start really doing damage on the enemy, they're already in cover, then you're probably getting a lot less value out of it than you might think. Same thing applies to health damage and armor damage. These two percentages should add up to be 1, because you can never damage both armor and health. You're either going to do one or the other. I've found through my testing that heroic missions and most content, you're dealing with about 60% health and 40% armor. Now, heroic control points and countdown, armor is probably a much higher percentage, but also there is some variance there with as soon as you run into a heavy or a dog or a robo tank or tech, or if you're going for weak points, those all take 100% health damage. So heavies and dogs definitely take a ton of damage. They're big damage soaks, so that's definitely going to skew the results a little bit. Alright, let's talk about our burst DPS and sustained DPS. So over here you can see the formula. We've got our average bullet damage, which we're plugging in from up what we got in this calculation up here. Multiply that by the number of bullets in the mag. Remember, this is face value, so if you're running most ARs, it's 50 rounds. And you divide that by the time it takes to fire the mag. Remember that the time to fire the mag is the number of bullets in the mag minus 1, because that first bullet is shot instantaneously at time 0, divided by your rate of fire. Now for our sustained DPS, it's not that much different. We just need to account for the reload time. So you do the same thing to calculate your time to fire your mag. All you need to do is add in the time it takes to reload the mag, put that into the calculation, and you'll get your sustained DPS. Your sustained DPS will always be lower than your burst DPS because you're adding something to the denominator here. Put that into the calculation and you'll get your sustained DPS. Your sustained DPS will always be lower than your burst DPS because you're adding something to the denominator here. Keep in mind that you can have a crit and a headshot happen on the same bullet. Pay attention to this sub-equation right here. If you get a crit headshot, those two bonuses are additive together. They are not multiplicative. So it's typically not advised to have crits and headshots on the same build. In addition, you're either typically going for headshots or you're not going for headshots. The biggest drawback to headshot builds is that not every single enemy has a head that can be shot. And so there are going to be times when you get absolutely no bonus from headshot damage. You also don't want to go for crits and headshots because headshots are much harder to hit and body shots are much easier to hit. So if you're going to try and get your maximum hit percentage, you're going to go for body shots, and you should go for crits and not headshots. So why do we care if a bonus is multiplicative or additive? You can see from our calculation that if there are two bonuses of the same value, a multiplicative bonus is going to give you more than an additive bonus. If you're running vigilance and you're always getting shot, that talent is not going to be up very often for you and you're not getting the full value of the bonus. Keep in mind that rate of fire is a multiplicative bonus. There aren't very many sources of rate of fire, so I think people tend to forget about it, but it is multiplicative, at least to your burst DPS. This means for LMGs, what is commonly thought of as the meta for the second attribute is damage to armor, but this isn't true. You can go with rate of fire at 5% versus armor's 6%, but rate of fire will always be up. It will always be improving your burst DPS. Another option is to also go with damage to health, which is a 9.5% bonus as opposed to damage to armor's 6% bonus. And in most content, damage to health will be active more often than damage to armor. Well, agents, I hope you enjoyed discussing DPS in depth as much as I did. Let me know if you disagree or if there's anything I neglected to include, or even if there was anything I was wrong about. Sound off in the comments. All feedback is welcome. Let's continue the community's growth and understanding of the game. Until next time, agents, this is Dispatch. Take care out there.